Hello, everyone. Welcome. I am thrilled to have this special guest with us today. He's traveled from Germany to be with us. There are two different signs for Germany, and the second one is most appropriate. His name is Andreas Bittner. I just want to provide a few background details, and then we'll turn it over to Andreas. He was born deaf in Germany in the southern state of Bavaria. Germany has two different school systems, interestingly enough. There is a residential school for the deaf and a school for those who are considered hard of hearing. He was mainstreamed during his high school experience, where he started to learn German Sign Language that is called DGS, excuse me. He entered Humboldt University. He received his bachelor's degree in deaf studies and political science. He then achieved his master's degree in sign language pedagogy and political science. He works as a professor now at Humboldt University, and he has been there since 2017. He also teaches DGS in Germany as well. He is the president of Berlin Association of the Deaf. He's been acting president for 6 years. He's going to talk about the deaf community and deaf people's lives in Germany. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Andreas.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to my talk today. I'll be talking about deaf lives in Germany. Oh, and I forgot first that I wanted to thank Lisa Bowling, Keith Cagle, for establishing this Zoom link today so I could come and chat with you all. I've been here at RIT for the week. I've been able to participate in some classes, meet with faculty members, and it's been a really nice experience. It was a short trip, but also very nice. I also want to thank Danny Mafia, who is the person who first got in touch with me to come do this presentation. So now on to what life in Germany is like. Now I'm limited to 50-minute presentation, but I do have 5 topics I'd like to cover today. I know that we're on Zoom. Sometimes we have technical difficulties, but that's okay. So like I said, we have 5 topics that I would like to go into today as they apply to Germany. Some facts about Germany, the education system, German Sign Language, deaf associations and cultural life, and then the legal right to interpretation services. So Keith already mentioned to you that the sign for our country is your index finger on the forehead. And we keep it at the forehead, not at the top of the head. So make sure that we are signing it correctly. So you can see on the map here, Germany is in the central part of Europe. It's, let me see if I can explain to you the size of Germany and compare it to the US for you. So Germany is 4%, less than 4% of the USA. And if you are familiar with the size of the state of Texas, Germany is about half the size of Texas. The size of Texas in square footage and square mileage is much larger, about 2 times the size of Germany. 84 million people live in Germany right at this time. So I'm going to choose the 5 largest cities in Germany to talk about. We have Berlin, which is the capital. Remember, the Berlin Wall went right through Berlin.
That's the Brandenburg Gate.
And that is the Brandenburg Gate there that you see on the picture. And now traffic is allowed through. Berlin is very different from the rest of the country and the rest of the cities in Germany. Next is Hamburg, which is the 2nd largest city in Germany. It functions on a port economy. The 3rd biggest city is Munich, which is in the southern part of Germany in the state of Bavaria. They are famous for Oktoberfest. They wear certain outfits. There's a lot of beer, obviously.
Lederhosen.
They wear lederhosen. It's exactly as you see in the advertisements, and it's quite a large festival. So that's Oktoberfest. It's actually very unique to the area. It's a very short period of time out of 1 year that they celebrate like this. And I was born in that area of Bavaria. I wasn't ever part of that experience that I just described with the costuming and the beer and all that kind of stuff. The next city I'll talk about is Cologne, and they are very economically successful in that city. Can we go to the next slide, please? So you may have thought that the states of Germany were similar to the states of the United States. Well, there are 16 states in Germany. Education is typically by state. And the leader of that is Olaf Scholz. There are 2 ways to sign Olaf and Scholz. And he's the chancellor. I think the previous chancellor is somebody that you all are familiar with, Angela Merkel. She had a variety of sign names. She was chancellor for 16 years. And so finally we have Olaf. I'm going to focus on the deaf community in Germany. We'll talk about the population of deaf people, and that's on the next slide.
Hopefully you all are able to see the numbers on the screen. There are 83,000 individuals who are deaf. There are more people if you count the hard of hearing individuals in Germany as well. The signing community is about 200,000 strong. The official numbers, there are no official numbers because the word deaf has a different emphasis than it does in the United States. In the United States, you can say deaf and it's much more inclusive in nature. In Germany, the word is used to categorize individuals who are profoundly deaf, and it does not include those who are hard of hearing. So there is a separate label for people who are hard of hearing. That is why we have different numbers. There are people with hearing loss, and that word is taub. Taub is an old word. Oh, I'm sorry. Taub, young people use the word taub to describe deaf people and their association with the community. The older word focused on the audiological condition of being deaf. I'd like to talk about sign language in Germany now. DGS. D means German or Deutsch. G is the word for sign, and S is the word for language. That's why it's DGS. That is a translation from German to English. It became an official language of Germany in 2002. So there are some influences from Belgium and other parts of Europe. People think that Austrian Sign Language is the same as German Sign Language, and that is an error. That is not true. They both write in German language, but the sign languages are very different. Austrian Sign Language has many influences from French Sign Language. It's very difficult to communicate in sign language between a German individual and an Austrian individual. DGS follows the object, subject, verb order. Oh, sorry. German Sign Language follows the subject, object, verb, word order. When people are having conversations in ASL, there's a lot of finger spelling. In German Sign Language, there's not a lot of finger spelling. So receptively for me, understanding finger spelling is a little difficult. In Germany, the whole country, there are regional sign differences, of course. I'll provide two examples for you. So you see the map of Germany and you see the different colors on that map. Today is Friday. In Germany, there are many different signs for Friday or Freitag. Some people are saying that they can't see the presenter. Can all of you in the audience see Andreas? Oh boy. Oh, I can. Oh, there we go. So the sign for the pink area, Eastern Germany. The orange area have different signs. In the southern area, Bavaria is in the green. And then there's a red area that signs it differently. So sign variation does exist in the country of Germany, just for one word, Freitag or Friday. Here's another example. We don't have a PowerPoint, so I'm going to show it you. It's the month of July, or Juli in German. There are various ways to finger spell Juli or July in German. In Berlin, they sign it this way. You might be wondering why. That's the school holiday. School is closed for a month in the month of July. So deaf kids get bored. So they sign the sign for boring for July. September, the month of September. They sign the month September. It looks like teaching because children are back to school, of course. There's a lot of signs that are built conceptually because of deaf individuals' experience. So you can see on this slide the different pictures of the residential schools for the deaf. They were taken around the year 1990 in that era. The top one is a dormitory. The next one is a classroom building. I started attending school there. And it depends on your hearing loss and your audiogram. I was put in a residential school. If you're profoundly deaf, you're put in a residential school. If you're hard of hearing, they put you in a different school. My parents were very strong advocates for speech, so I was put in the hard of hearing dormitory. They're very close next to each other. I'm sorry, they're not in different schools. The school is one place. Dormitories for deaf students is one area. Dormitories for hearing students is another area. So the dormitories were side by side. But we were not allowed to socialize with one another. We could see each other, but we were kept separate. There was no interaction between the groups. That school is famous for its separations. French was much more technical in its signing style. So they were very different expressions in visual language. So that, of course, is a little primer on history. Different deaf schools came to be. There were some deaf teachers, some advocated for signing, some advocated for speaking. And of course, you know, the biggest impact in our history, what I'm going to speak about next, is the Milan Congress. Hopefully you can all see the slides. As you know, during the Milan Congress, it was decided to ban sign language and promote an oral teaching method, regardless of hearing status. And that began the decline of residential schools for the deaf and use of sign language from 1880 on. In my time in school, I was pressured, all of us were pressured as young children to speak. As an example, we were punished for using sign language. If someone spoke, but still couldn't understand, and they tried to sign to get their communication clear, they were punished and had to write sentences over and over again. The sentence was, "I will not use sign language because that is less than hearing people. I don't want to oppress hearing people because it oppresses, if I use sign language, I will oppress hearing people." It was horribly, horribly punitive. And that's just one small example. There are many that I could share with you. So that era had a huge impact on the deaf community and sign language. Sign language is a language. And ASL was impacted as well from the Milan Congress. Deaf Way 1 and Deaf Way 2. People had discussions and took what they learned from Deaf Way 1 and 2 and brought it back to the German government and worked and fought until sign language became the official language, official language of Germany. So schools went through a lot of flux during this time. Teachers who supported oral education kept with that. Teachers who were able to adopt a new philosophy adapted with the times. I'll give you a moment to read what's on the slide. In 1993, a bilingual school was set up as a trial in Hamburg, which is in North Germany. It was the first bilingual school. Then another school was established. And then in 2001, there was a law passed that provided the right to sign language interpreting services. Not in all aspects of life, in specific situations. That started in 2001. The next year, German Sign Language became officially recognized by the government. So that was 1 year later. It was recognized as an equal language to spoken German. There are still struggles and challenges, as with any country. There have been changes happening. Most recently, in 2018, the government provided compensation for deaf persons who attended boarding school from 1949 to 1975 in the West until 1980, who experienced abuse. 14,000 euros was awarded to individuals. So equal to about $15,000 US. It was because of their suffering and punishment and abuse in the German school system. Prior to that, in 2016, there was a law passed that DGS had to be learned in school, meaning different states of Germany had to adapt their curriculum to include sign language study and programs. Everyone in Germany has to learn DGS despite their hearing status.
Today, there are about 80 deaf and hard of hearing schools. Some of them use sign language, some of them are oral. There are typically more oral schools than sign language schools, and a lot of them, unfortunately, have been closing. But that's a problem all around the world, too. Schools for the deaf are losing students because of the mainstream system with interpreters in classrooms, or they're using hearing aids or other assistive technologies. And so that's really what's changing our education system right now internationally. Now, the German education system right now has been impacted by all of this as well. All right, next we'll go on to deaf associations in Germany. And this is common in Germany as it is all over the world. And these are especially important for the deaf community. They serve as meeting places for people to come and discuss whatever issues there might be. The very first association that was established is the Deaf Associations of Germany, as you see on the screen. That was back in 1848 when the first association was established. You see the picture of the man there. He was the one who established this association. And it's the statue of him is still there. And the association has been running and active since 1848. There are other regional associations and resources throughout Germany. In 1927, that was the Reich Association of the Deaf that was established in Germany. And of course, that was right before the Nazis came into power. And when they came into power, that did change a lot. Let's see, I'm going to switch slides here. Okay. I'm quickly running out of time. So I just wanted to make sure that you knew that there, in the picture that I skipped over, it shows you of the variety of associations that existed by religious group or school affiliations or religious affiliations. There were a variety of associations that were established. And when the Nazi regime took over, they shrunk down to just one association, and the deaf associations were no more. It was decided that there needed to be a central location, a centralized organization, and not many independently run organizations throughout the country. Also, a lot of deaf and Jewish people were deported. And so the remaining deaf people joined hearing associations or organizations for support. It was a very challenging time for people. They experienced a lot of discrimination and oppression. They couldn't communicate with their Jewish community, so there was extreme suffering involved. Many tried to escape, immigrate. Some people went to Israel. They were deported to camps. Israeli sign and German sign are very similar because of that refugee situation. So deaf people who were not Jewish also experienced challenges during that time. There were T4 programs for euthanasia, which they say put them to sleep, but that is technically murder of people with other disabilities, and that included many deaf people with additional disabilities, maybe mental illness. If it happened to be found that the deafness in their family was generational or genetic, if the Nazis were able to find a gene in the bloodline that caused the deafness, people would be sterilized. And if there were many deaf families in their history, they would sterilize individuals. And it wasn't necessarily because of the deafness, it was because of the genetic part of it. So if the Nazis discovered that a child was deaf from deaf parents, the child would be sterilized in order to prevent genetic deafness from continuing. And it was never explained to people why the sterilization was happening. And that really had a huge impact on our deaf community. They did not know they were sterilized. They just knew that they had had a surgery. So Nazi time was very violent. Deaf and Jewish people experienced sterilization, oppression, Some deaf people who supported the Nazi regime were involved in the murdering of other deaf and Jewish people as well. Obviously, you know that Germany lost the war and different countries took over different parts of Germany and occupied different parts of Germany. And therefore, there were different associations established in the West and East of Germany. I think that we're familiar with the line between West and East Germany. In 1950, foundation of the German Deaf Association happened. And then in 1957, the foundation was also established in the East. Now they had to have one for each part of Germany. In the eastern part of Germany, there were more hard of hearing people, but in the western part of Germany, the deaf associations and hard of hearing associations were kept separate, which is quite interesting to me. So as time went on, let's see, in 1984 or 1989, there was the fall of the wall. In 1990, Germany became a union. And in the East, the association still wanted to be separated into deaf and hard of hearing. And then eventually in 91, they all joined together as a national association. I wish I could explain more, but I'm running out of time. Sorry. Wanted to explain how to become a member. So the deaf community today is dwindling. Associations and clubs are declining. Deaf children, children who are born deaf now often receive cochlear implants because the German government fully funds the cost of the cochlear implants. So any child born deaf is implanted. If there is someone who's hard of hearing or late deafened or learned sign language later, those numbers are on the rise. So quite often, deaf people who have learned to speak and use their hearing are learning sign language later and continuing to sign. Our education system has improved. Deaf people are now associated with hearing organizations, and in general, the country is more open. But there is still a lot of division. There's more respect for deaf women, deaf LGBTQ members. Remember, Black Lives Matter. That really influenced and changed people's thinking about Black deaf people and deaf blind individuals. So we are realizing that our community is much more diverse than it used to be. I've given you a lot of information here. I think this will probably be the last thing I share. So there's an interesting discussion to be had about how to be an interpreter and how to get a degree in interpreting. So if you look at these 7 cities on the map of Germany, those cities all have interpreter training programs. Now, the program structure for each one is fairly different. There are some similarities. Some are degrees, some are diplomas, but the point is they all have some sort of certification program. And so once you've gone through the program that is offered in these cities, you're considered a certified interpreter. There isn't a separate organization that certifies interpreters. It's just that once you've gone through one of these programs, you are certified and qualified to be an interpreter. The amount of money an interpreter earns depends on the setting in which they work. The funding does not come from me as a deaf person. It doesn't impact me directly. Interpreters can travel throughout the country interpreting. Sometimes interpreters earn the same pay rate as other interpreters throughout the country. Currently, it's average 85 euros, which is approximately $91 per hour. And so it's obviously based on area in Germany. So in Berlin, the university where I work is here. You can see that the buildings are old, gorgeous. There's an interpreter program there. And you can actually see my office, the window from my office in this picture. I have an amazing view. It's quite beautiful. If you ever are interested in coming to see my view, please do. So typically a person would get a bachelor's degree in deaf studies, and that's for about 3 years' time. They could also focus on history, interpreting, sign language in general in that degree. That's a bachelor's degree. And then they would do an additional 2 years in a master's degree program for interpreting specifically. And once they graduate with a master's degree in interpreting, they are qualified as a certified interpreter. And this structure that I just explained there is not the same in all of those 7 different cities that offer the program. So how do you get an interpreter? So as a deaf person, if I am interested in, well, if anybody, deaf or hearing, wants an interpreter for any situation, it really depends on the setting or the reason for the request. So you can see on the screen there that there are 5 reasons that have legal entitlement. Administration, like if you were going to a police station or something like that, you would be guaranteed an interpreter. The court system, health sector, if you had a doctor's appointment or something like that. Also, health insurance would cover the cost of your interpreter for those situations. Also, your work life, you are guaranteed an interpreter. It's called integration service in that situation. And that means that the service pays for the interpreter. It is not easy, though, to schedule an interpreter because they want to know all of the details of the interpreter request. And they also evaluate me to determine whether the interpreter is being paid appropriately. And I would get the sum of money and divvy out the payments. So sometimes I have to negotiate to get an interpreter at work. Sometimes the negotiations happen and I have to wait 2 or 3 months to be paid for the cost of the interpreter. Now, in the education system, it really does depend on the state and the policies that each school system has. Depends. As an example, it depends on which domain. And some areas actually don't have any certain policies. Some places where if you want an interpreter, you might have to pay out of pocket, or you might have to ask an interpreter to volunteer because that's for social reasons. Sometimes people may donate a little bit of money, and that's for social activities. where you're typically asking somebody if they would just come as a favor. And that also applies to like going to the museum. I might pay every once in a while. Sometimes the museum organization would pay for the interpreter, but there is no policy stating who is required to pay. Anything that happens in your private life or religious life is completely up to you, and there's no guarantee. So we also have video relay services. And one of those examples is VRS that you see on the screen here. It's called TESS. I think it's very similar to the video relay system that the US has, except that the funding is different. So if I want to use VRS services, I have to sign up and pay a fee. It's a 24-hour service, but I am allotted 30 free minutes every month. And so that's great. I have 30 minutes, but anything beyond 30 minutes, I have to pay for out of pocket. And you can see that it's 14 cent euros or about 15 cents US dollars per minute that I pay out of pocket for any time beyond 30 minutes. And it's not that expensive, but a deaf person would be required to pay for those services. And this service here is limited to private phone calls. It's not for employment reasons. In that bubble below, if I wanted to use this service for work, the cost goes up significantly. You can see that it's 261 euros a month, which is about $280 US a month for this service. And that's just the sign-on fee. That doesn't include any of the calling. So there's a monthly fee plus there's a $2.02 fee, which is about $2.17 US, that is on top of the $281 US a month. And sometimes it can be covered by outside organizations, and you can be paid back if it's for work. Sometimes you have to be able to predict the number of hours you will use, so the funding will be available for you to be reimbursed if you want to be reimbursed for all the phone calls you make for work. All right, now captioning and subtitles on TV. So anything that is considered public is accessible with captions. But anything that is considered private, they're not captioned quite as often. It's all based on the law. And if there isn't a law, then typically there aren't as many captions. And usually only about 20% of private television shows are captioned. The news have interpreters on screen. And usually the interpreters on screen aren't for any of the larger news channels. They're for some of the smaller news channels. And it's often harder to see. It's not on the big screen. The interpreter is there, but in the corner of the screen. So public TV doesn't always include the interpreters. You have to watch the TV channel online in order to get to the interpreter. All right, next slide. All right, so the German deaf community has struggled to participate in public life. Our lives have improved significantly. But in my private life, if I want to get a haircut or go to a wedding, there aren't interpreters provided. There would be something that I would have to pay for myself or ask somebody to help me out or see if I could get some kind of funding to cover the cost. It also requires a lot of paperwork, and often it's not accepted. There's also, it's also very bureaucratic in the way that decisions are made. So now we're seeing a lot more interpreters included in various sectors. But the problem is that we do have interpreters available, but the request needs to come in about 3 months in advance, because that's the only way that we can get funding. Like I mentioned, there is that delay in reimbursement. And so by the time funding comes in for the interpreter's schedules are already booked. So people are planning 3 months ahead of time. People are begging for help to try and get interpreters into their situations. And that is a point of contention for deaf people in Germany. So obviously, Germany has a lot of really great things going for its deaf community, but there are a lot of struggles that we see too. And it definitely has gotten better as I've gotten older, but there are still issues that exist. But like I said, there are many improvements that have come. So I want to thank you all for watching today. I apologize about the technical issues that arose, but I hope that it was smooth and pleasant for you to watch, and hopefully you learned something new. Hope you learned something about the deaf community in Germany. If you have any questions, I apologize, we don't have time right now for them, but you see my contact information on the screen right now. So please feel free to send me an email and I can get back to you and answer your questions. So thank you all so much. Thank you for watching.